I'm going to call to order this Lacey City Council meeting on November 7th, 2019. If you're able, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would ask for one amendment to this evening's agenda. I would be pleased if the council would switch items number 5 and items number 6 and let the proclamations go before the public hearings, just so we can get those proclamations underway, because I know there's people waiting for them.
So I move that we approve the amended agenda and consent agenda items.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the amended agenda and consent agenda items. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. We have an amended agenda. And first up on our amended agenda is public comments on items not on the agenda. And we did have a couple sheets signed up, so if you're here for this public comment period, that's great, and we'll go now, and then a little bit later in the agenda, we will have some public hearings and where people can talk at that point as well. So first up is Lisa Giletti. You know the routine. Keep your comments about 3 minutes, and please
Got
keep
it.
3 minutes.
Lisa Gelati, I live in Lacey, and I handed out some packets to y'all so you can visit those later. Certainly planned this before I knew that the budget was tonight, so keep that in mind. So I'm Lisa Gelati with Build a Bus Home, and our nonprofit started the Mobile Hygiene Infrastructure Program, for those of you that don't know. And as you know, or not, the county declared a public health crisis in 2018 in June, and then Olympia in July of that year. And the point in time count went up for the number of homeless, as we know. And so we're looking to better health, help people get better health and better access. And so we're looking for community cooperation to bring our mobile hygiene infrastructure to all the cities in Thurston County. And we're asking for your support. We are looking for a test case coming up within 30 to 60 days. We're looking for a little bit of funding for that, asking for $5,000 from the city of Lacey, and to do a partnership together to make this happen. We're talking with all the other municipalities around as well. And so I welcome you to talk with us afterwards. And I thank you for your time today, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Next up is Peter Cook. You can state your full name and tell us where you live, and keep your comments about 3 minutes.
Hey, I'm Peter Cook. I actually live in Olympia, but I've got some links to Lacey. And I represent the Faith Alliance Initiative for Tiny Houses, and also the Build a Bus Home shower trailer project that Lisa just described to you. And the Faith Alliance has just been starting projects in tiny houses to put tiny houses on Faith community property. And we're looking to do that throughout the Olympia, Lacey, Tumwater area. And the the shower trailer project is a complementary service to that, because in fact, these tiny house communities that are just starting up, we're just doing the first one in Olympia right now as we speak, and they need showers to go with that as part of the services provided to these formerly homeless people. So we see definitely a need to address homelessness in a comprehensive way. So, of course, there's the permanent housing aspect of it. There's transitional housing, which is what the tiny houses are, and there may be several forms of that we all should be looking at. And then there's the shelter in place for homeless people that are in tents and other places, and they need some alleviation of the suffering that they're going through in order to help them reintegrate back into the rest of society. So we're looking for policies to support each component of this kind of continuum of homelessness and interaction with us. So part of it that deals with the shower trailer project, you have the envelope that Lisa handed out. We'd like you to look at that. We're asking for $30,000 in the coming year as a potential contribution, which we're hoping will be in line with the kind of services that we would be supplying in Lacey. So that's the short-term program, and we're ready to meet at any time to discuss further details of that. So thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you. Next up is Shelley. Shelley Willie. Yes, no? Okay, no problem. Is there anyone else wishing to address this council on any items not on the agenda? Seeing none, then we'll go right into our proclamations. And our first proclamation is for student orchestras of Greater Olympia.
City of Lacey official proclamation. Whereas the student orchestras of Greater Olympia, known as SOGO, enable young musicians in the South Puget Sound region to grow and express their musical talents while sharing their gifts with the community. And
whereas SOGO musicians, including 25 students from the City of Lacey, rehearse weekly with professional conductors and teaching artists to perform on the Washington Center stage and at local events. And
whereas SOGO supports and is supported by school music programs and private music teachers. And
whereas SOGO parents and community members serve as volunteers and board members, strengthening the organization and the regional community. And
Whereas SOGO's mission is to lead, inspire, perform, repeat, orchestrating lifelong participation in the arts. And
Whereas SOGO graduates have become musicians, music teachers, and supporters of music and the arts in our community. And whereas SOGO is an integral part of the cultural and educational life of the City of Lacey.
Now, therefore, I, Andy Ryder, Mayor of the City of Lacey, and on behalf of the Lacey City Council, do hereby proclaim September 2019 through June 2020 to be Student Orchestras of Greater Olympia's 20th birthday bash celebration season in the City of Lacey, and encourage all citizens to join me in celebrating the Student Orchestras of Greater Olympia's contributions to our community. It's signed by myself, Mayor Andy Ryder, dated November 7th, 2019. And for those of you who were here earlier, we had a little preview of what they do, and it was absolutely beautiful. So thank you for that. And hopefully, John can come up and. Here you go. You want to say a few words?
Sure. Let me get my notes. I'm John Fleckenstein, live in Tumwater now, have lived in Olympia. On behalf of the Student Orchestras of Greater Olympia, also known as SOGO, I'd like to express our appreciation to the Lacey City Council for recognizing our 20th birthday season. I served as board president for several years and am now in charge of our birthday bash, which we are celebrating over the course of the year. As the proclamation states, our mission is lead, inspire, perform, repeat, orchestrating lifelong participation in the arts. Over the last 20 years, I've seen SOGO touch the lives of over 1,000 young musicians in Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater, and surrounding communities. We currently have students from, I believe, 8 school districts and probably all of the local high schools and middle schools as members. Our graduates are now giving back their time and talent to nurture the musical arts in their own communities. Some have gone on to become professional musicians and music educators. All have learned the lessons of self-discipline, dedication, and self-confidence that come from studying and performing classical music. Thank you for this honor.
Thank you.
We have some materials on the back table there, including the flyer about our upcoming events, the SOGO Ho-Ho and the Messiah. We sponsor the Messiah at the Washington Center in December, and we'd be delighted to see and to hear you all there.
Great, thank you. So next up under proclamations is Small Business Saturday.
Okay. City of Lacey official proclamation. Whereas the City of Lacey celebrates and supports our small businesses and the contributions they make to our local economy and community, and
Whereas there are currently 30.7 million small businesses in the United States, which represents 99.7% of all businesses with employees in the United States, and
Whereas small businesses employ over 47.3% of all businesses with employees in the United States and are responsible for 64.9% of net new jobs created over the past 20 years. And
Whereas small businesses contribute positively to the local community by supplying jobs and generating tax revenue, and are critical to the overall economic health of the United States, and
Whereas it is important for people to support the small businesses that they value in their community, and
Whereas advocacy groups and public and private organizations in our community and across the country have endorsed the Saturday after Thanksgiving as Small Business Saturday.
Now, therefore, I, Andy Ryder, Mayor of the City of Lacey, and on behalf of the Lacey City Council, do hereby proclaim Saturday, November 30th, 2019, as Small Business Saturday in the City of Lacey. And I encourage citizens to support small businesses and merchants on Small Business Saturday and throughout the year. And Melanie's here from the chamber. Here you go.
Well, I will keep it short, but my name is Melanie Terry, and I am extremely new to this area, but it is so refreshing to come to an area that invests so much in their small business, and I have the honor and pleasure to accept this on behalf of the businesses that we represent at the Lacey South Sound Chamber. I do send my regards from Blaine Land, our executive director, as well as our board, and thank you again for having us, and we're looking forward to this Saturday. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I just wanted to bring awareness that many of our small businesses in the community are veteran and minority owned and operated. Melanie, I believe her family is also active duty. And so just something people don't think of very often, and it's I think it's very important to mention.
Great, thank you. And then our last proclamation is for the Zonda Club Centennial.
City of Lacey official proclamation, where it is the tradition of the Lacey City Council to acknowledge the contribution of exceptional regional community service organizations, and
Whereas Zonta International was formed in 1919 to help all women realize greater equality while using their individual and collective expertise, and
whereas the organization grew quickly from a single chartered club in Buffalo, New York, to more than 1,200 clubs globally with over 29,000 members, and
whereas the members of Zonta International remain committed to realizing their goal where women's rights are recognized as human rights, and
Whereas the organization continues to fight for equal access to resources and representation in leadership roles for women, and
Whereas among those distinguished clubs is the Zonta Club of Olympia, formed in 1928. And whereas Zonta Club of Olympia, through service, advocacy, and fundraising, supports many local nonprofits that directly help the Lacey community and beyond. And
Now, therefore, I, Andy Ryder, Mayor of City of Lacey, on behalf of the Lacey City Council, do hereby proclaim Saturday, November 8th, 2019, as the centennial anniversary of Zonta International Day in the City of Lacey. And I am going to ask Councilmember Zeman actually to come up and present this award. And I also have just a personal story. My mother was involved in Zonta, and I remember as a young kid following her around and her really introducing me to giving back to the community. And so Zonta has a special place in my heart, too. So Councilmember Zeman. Yes.
It is such an honor for me to do this. I am the president of Zonta Club of Olympia and so proud of the people who serve with Zonta, not only here for the last 91 years, but around the world. This is an amazing moment for me right now, and I'm so, so proud to do this.
Mayor Ryder, Deputy Mayor Pratt, council members and guests, the members of Zonta International and the Zonta Club of Olympia would like to thank you for the proclamation honoring the centennial anniversary of Zonta International. As a club, we celebrated our 91st year in October of this past year, or just now, like a week ago, a month ago. Our members have worked to help women and children in Tumwater, Olympia, Lacey, and Thurston County to provide scholarships and service grants, volunteer for local nonprofits, and advocating on issues that affect women and children. Zonta works to improve women's lives, their children's lives, and the communities in which they live and work. Zonta is working to make gender equality a reality for women and girls worldwide. Zonta International and the Zonta Club of Olympia envision a world in which women's rights are recognized as human rights and every woman is able to achieve her full potential. In such a world, women have access to all resources and are represented in decision-making on an equal basis with men. In such a world, no woman lives in fear of violence. Thank you again for this honor. And yes, I do have a name. I'm Paige Porter.
Thank you, Paige.
Thank you very much.
So next up on our agenda is our public hearings. We have several of them. The first one is a public hearing on the 2020 revenue sources, and I'm going to open up that public hearing now. Troy?
Thank you, Mayor Ryder. Good evening, members of the council. Tonight, we are conducting 2 of 3 public hearings on the 2020 budget. This particular hearing is a required hearing before we adopt the property tax for the following year. And you are scheduled to adopt the 2020 property tax next Thursday on the 14th. So this presentation will really focus on the general fund and property taxes, but of course I will touch on some of our other revenue sources as it is a great interest to the public. But I will start with the general fund revenues. These are your total revenues, about $51.6 million. This is an increase of about $3.8 million, or a decrease, I'm sorry. I will point out there is a change to the property tax from the printed budget. We are constantly getting updates on new construction as well as assessed valuation throughout this process, so that's actually pretty normal. I do have detailed slides on each one of these categories, but I would like to point out a couple of the more significant variances that you see before you. Sales tax has a $1.5 million increase. This is more of a projection change than an actual increase to sales tax. We've always traditionally taken a conservative approach to sales tax projections, so this is really kind of a catch-up to what's actually happening out there. The other category I'd like to touch on really quickly is service fees. That's about a $1.1 million increase. There's a couple of reasons for this variance. One is an increase to our internal service fees. These are engineering primarily. So we have our engineering staff within our general fund that performs design work that's actually charged out to our utilities, as well as an implementation of indirect costs for our wastewater and stormwater funds. And indirect costs are really like an overhead rate. So these are services that are performed by the general fund that benefit other funds. So we actually charge out those costs and recoup those. And then all other, this is obviously a big category. We have a significant change of a $7 million decrease. The primary reason here is a change to capital projects. So we have less beginning or reserves being used for capital projects, as well as transfers in between funds to fund those capital projects. Here is the same information in graph form. So these are the same categories as a percentage of the total budget. Really just a couple comments here. When you look at our revenues for the general fund, about 60% comes from taxes. Our largest source of revenue for the general fund is sales tax at 25%. We are a little bit unique. I think most cities in Washington, the largest source of revenue is property tax. And of course, we voluntarily reduced our property tax back in 2011 as we annexed into Fire District 3. So we had about a $4.7 million reduction to property tax at that time. Another interesting thing I'd like to point out, if you look at the fees that we charge out for services, so if you look at permits and fees and service fees, it's about 21% of our total general fund revenues. Those are really the fees that we charge out for the services that are directly received. So that's a really small percentage. So the rest is really made up in general taxes in terms of the services that we provide to citizens of Lacey. I do want to focus on property tax. As I said, this is really one of the main purposes of tonight's hearing. Here are the projected property taxes for 2020. Again, this is a change from the printed budget. If you look at our general levy, we have an increase of about $349,000. The next three levies are voter-approved bond levies. So these levies really match the debt service that's required to pay the debt service in the next year. I do want to show some details on the property tax changes for 2020. You really start with the current year property tax, which is $6,797,100. We do have three reasons that property taxes are increasing. The first is new construction. This is about a $267,000 increase. So new construction is valuation or new properties that actually get attached to the assessment for the city of Lacey. This is exempt from the 1%, so this is really just those new properties being assessed property tax. You do have the 1% revenue limit. This is a statutory limit that the city council cannot raise property taxes by more than 1%. So this is simply 1% times the current year's property tax, so just under $68,000 increase. The refund levy, this is the change to property tax that we received late last week. This is a $13,433 increase. The refund levy this is an adjustment from the 2019 property taxes. So anytime there is an adjustment made to current year property taxes, in this case, the property tax is going down for those individual property owners, that doesn't change the legal amount the city can collect, so it gets placed back onto the rolls and is distributed amongst the remaining assessed valuation of the city. And so your 2020 general property tax levy for 2020 is $7,145,693. Again, an increase of just under $349,000. I do want to take a look at the history of property tax here in Lacey. This is a 10-year look back at each of the levy rates, and of course the 2020 is an estimate at this point. But really what I want to focus on is the fact that we're below $1 for our general levy. I think this is the first time in our history. Of course, this 10-year look back doesn't include where we previously collected property tax or fire services. That was in 2010. Again, 2011, we had that voluntary reduction. But this is a pretty significant year for the levy. And as you look at the 10-year period, this of course includes just following the Great Recession. So we had a period of properties that were actually decreasing in value, and this actually happened according to this, what you see before you for the first 3 years of the table, so 2011 through 2013, we actually had a declining property value, which actually had the rate increase. So it's an inverse relationship between what's happening with valuation and what ends up happening when we calculate the rate. And then since 2013, so 2014 through 2020, so the last 7 years, we've seen a pretty significant appreciation to the value of Lacey properties. Here's the same information in graph form. It's a little easier to see where the levy rate was increasing 2011 through 13 because of declining valuation. And then since that period, we've had declining rates. So I'd like to spend a couple minutes illustrating how the rate is calculated and how it relates to the 1%. It's been a few years since I've presented this at this hearing. So I think it's time to revisit that. I think it's good information for the public. But I'm actually really excited because of course we take a simplification of our property tax, but this year's appreciation of existing properties is 10%. So it actually matches this slide. So it should be a little bit easier to follow for the folks in the audience and at home. So this is an example of where property valuation is increasing. So let me explain the revenue limit. Again, it's a 1% limitation that the city council may increase property taxes. This is a limit on what the city can collect, not the rate. This is, I think, contrary to logic a little bit. Most taxes, we set the rate, and then it applies to whatever the basis is. But this is a case where we set the maximum amount collected, and the rate is actually calculated in the following year by the county assessor. So at this point, we don't even know the rate, so it's calculated again, probably in January, maybe even February. I think the requirement is to calculate it by February. So in this illustration, of course, our property tax revenues are higher than $1 million, but to simplify the example, so let's take year one, so let's just say that's 2019. If our property tax revenues are $1 million, the 1% is calculating that $1 million. So the most we can collect in the next year is $1,010,000. And again, that exempts the refund levy as well as the new construction. So we're really just talking about the 1%. And again, this is an example in which we have increasing valuation. So in this case, we have an increase of 10%. And of course, this is an average across all Lacey properties. So individual homes may increase something different than 10%. But in this example, let's assume that we have $100 million of valuation. We actually have about $7.2 billion, just for your information. So a 10% increase is $110 million of valuation. So in the current year, the county assessor calculated the rate. So the rate is, the calculation is you take the amount of the levy, which is $1 million, divided by the assessed valuation, which is $100 million, but you divide that by 1,000, and you get $10 per $1,000 of valuation. So let's fast forward to 2020 or year two. So again, we have the 1% limit. So the most we could collect is $1,010,000. And you take that and you divide that by a 10% increase in valuation, so $110 million of valuation. And the levy rate calculation is $9.18. So if you look at the rate itself, we actually have an 8.2% decrease to the levy rate. But again, the revenue limit is based on the legal amount we could collect, which is the $1,010,000. So again, I think that's kind of contrary to logic and probably what most people think about in terms of property tax. So to further illustrate, let's look at an individual home in Lacey. Let's just assume that's $100,000. So let's use year one again. So you take the $100,000 valuation of that home, divided by $1,000, and you multiply that by the $10, you end up with $1,000 in property tax being assessed to that property. So if we fast forward to the next year, or in this case 2020, you take the same 10% increase of that home, so instead of $100,000, it's $110,000. You multiply that by the new rate of $9.18, you end up with a taxes owing of $1,010 or 1%. So it's not always easy to follow this if you're looking at your own individual property tax bill each year, because again, the chances of your home actually increasing by the same amount or decreasing by the average amount is probably pretty slim, but assuming that you do have a house that's very typical within the city of Lacey, you could see that it's a 1% increase, although it's very difficult to follow. So let's switch gears here and talk about sales tax. Again, this is our number one source of revenue for the general fund. Almost 25% of all revenues is from sales tax. This is the budget history for the last 10 years. Our projection for 2020 is about $12.6 million. Again, about a $1.5 million increase. Again, this is more of an adjustment to the projection than an actual increase in sales taxes that are expected next year. But within this calculation or projection, we do expect that the construction level in 2020 will be similar to 2019. So we're still expecting a higher collection rate than normal. We have more of an inflationary increase in terms of the remaining sales taxes being collected throughout Lacey. I do want to kind of dig down into the details of a sales tax because I think it's interesting and it actually informs the projection. So here is the top 20 sources of sales tax for the city of Lacey. The top 20 represent about 91% of all sales tax collected in Lacey, so I think it's pretty representative of the whole. Just for your information, there are about 95 categories of sales tax, and we have about just under 20,000 accounts or 20,000 taxpayers in this jurisdiction. If you look at sales tax actually through October, so these represent the latest sales tax collections, we're about 8% higher than last year, so we continue to grow, but I will point out that October of this year we had the first decline in about 3 years. Hopefully it's an anomaly. Of course, we'll be keeping a watchful eye on that. I like to say 1 month doesn't make a trend, so let's hope that that doesn't continue. We do want to look at some of our more significant categories. General merchandise is the city's single largest source of sales tax. In an average year, about 20% of all sales tax comes through this category. So year to date, we have a 2.9% increase compared to last year. So this is slightly higher than inflation here in Lacey. Do want to look at construction because that is really what's driving our change, our year-to-year change in sales tax. So these are the three most significant and most related to construction activity in the city of Lacey. So you have construction of buildings, specialty trade contractors. So a lot of these are subcontractors, and you have heavy and civil engineering construction. These are large infrastructure projects, think street projects, that type of thing. So these categories have increased about 19% compared to last year, about a $360,000 increase. So again, this is really what's driving our year-to-date increase for sales tax. I do want to point out miscellaneous store retailers. This is the category that is most impacted by the National Marketplace Fairness Act, or this is probably more commonly known as the internet tax. So both at the national level as well as the state level, we are now collecting sales tax on all internet sales. The individual taxpayers pay within all categories for the city of Lacey, but I think this is the most significant one. So we're seeing about a 20% increase in this category. This is a growing trend. Online sales, I think for the last 6 years, have grown about 15% per year. According to ecommerce.com, about 14% of all retail sales come from internet sales. So this is definitely a growing source of revenue for the city of Lacey. So I do want to look at the history of sales tax. It's obviously informative as to where we've come from and where we're going. This is a 20-year look. Of course, you go back that far, it gets less relevant. But what this captures is really the kind of the history of what's happened to Lacey Retail. And if you think about right up to the years, probably the 5 years up to the Great Recession in 2008, the city of Lacey had a great deal of retail development, which you could see that really sharp climb up to 2007, where we hit our pre-recession peak of about $9.6 million in sales tax. Of course, the Great Recession hits. We have slow recovery for about a 7-8 year period, which you see where we hit the post-recession bottom of $7.9 million. And then really we had about, it took, like I said, it took about 8 or 9 years for us to fully recover from the Great Recession. And there you see the $10.6 million in 2017. And there you see the 2018, where we've had significant construction activity. Of course, that 12.6 or $7 million is an all-time record for sales tax collections for Lacey. I do want to look at general merchandise specifically. Again, same 20-year period. Again, this is our most significant sales tax category. Again, you see the buildup of retail sales as major retail development occurred in the years running up to 2007. You can see, again, the pre-recession peak of 1.9. What's interesting here is this is relatively flat through this period. So we certainly haven't seen the growth you would expect, especially when you think about the increase in population in Lacey. It just doesn't match up. And the following slide here illustrates that, and this really captures the 10-year period. You're seeing a per capita of the general merchandise sales tax, and the city of Lacey experienced about an 11,000 population increase for this period, or about 28%. And of course, we didn't see the same increase to general merchandise sales tax. But this is, I think we've all theorized why this is. We haven't had major retail development in the last 10 years. In fact, I think the city manager illustrated in his budget presentation back on the 24th, you have to go back to 2007, is the last major retail development we had. So, that certainly makes sense. And then if you look at the makeup of our retail, they're not the one-time or discretionary type of retail type. So think car sales, and we have very little, in fact, almost no car sales here in Lacey. And when the economy is strong, you see those types of discretionary spending rise, and they fall during recessions. And so the good news for Lacey is we don't have these significant increases and decreases when you have periods of growth and recessions, but of course you stay relatively flat when you look at sales tax in general. So we do want to look at sales tax on construction as well through this same 20-year period, and this is very volatile, probably as expected. So we're following very similar trends with general merchandise. You see the heavy development leading up to the Great Recession. We had retail development as well as significant single-family home development. That was our previous record in 2007 for sales tax from construction at $2.4 million. Of course, you see the bottom fall out during the Great Recession and the slow recovery through the 2009 through 2015 years. We saw an increase in 15 and 16. That's from the school district bond projects. That was about a $200 million capital program by the school district. So that was a positive impact on construction activity for the city of Lacey. And then you see really a shift from residential development to industrial development. So a lot of development in Northeast Lacey. We also saw heavy development in Woodland Square or Lacey Midtown during this period. And of course, we've really broken the record again for activity from new construction. But we don't expect this to last forever. Of course, history shows that it doesn't. You can see the 20-year average for construction of about $1.2 million. I don't really even want to venture a guess as to where we may where we may see construction activity go if we do enter into another recession. That's obviously a significant decline if you compare the 2.7 to 1.2. I don't know what the new norm is anymore. It's, we've gone through some pretty significant and different financial times. So, but really the point is we need to remain cautious as we look at sales tax revenues, and we don't really want to grow into what we think are one-time sources of sales tax. So let's look at some of our other categories of revenues for the general fund. Utility tax is a significant source of revenues for the general fund. Overall, we have a $264,000 increase projected. There's, I think, 6 or 7 categories of utility tax. There's a lot of different things going on. Within those categories, we have really what's driving that increase is the Lacey-owned utilities. We have about a $198,000 increase projected. Natural gas, we have a $95,000 decrease projected. Really, that's a reflection of the weather, really just a kind of a trend analysis within that category. Telephone decrease of about $133,000. This is really a trend moving away from landline phones to mobile phones. And what is really significant about mobile phones is the majority of our mobile phone bills are exempt from utility tax. So we are not allowed to assess utility tax on data, and that's becoming more and more the use of a mobile phone is texting and internet usage. So we're seeing not only a shift to that, but also a shift to non-taxable activities. So I keep thinking that we're going to hit the bottom of that trend, but it continues to fall. And then we have an increase of about $112,000 from our fire suppression utility tax, and you might remember this from the Lane versus Seattle Supreme Court case that is driving that change. Looking at permits and fees, we have an overall decrease of almost $85,000, and really what is contributing to that is a franchise fee decrease of $95,000. And again, this is a trend analysis as we look at that category. Looking at other taxes, and this is primarily B&O tax, so business and occupation tax, admissions, and gambling tax. The most significant change here is business and occupation projections of about $157,000 increase. The basis of this tax is very similar to sales tax, so it's really the retail or business activity. State shared revenues have very little change projected for 2020. It's a net change of about a $12,000 decrease. Really kind of have offsetting projections for liquor excise versus the liquor revolving fund. And then we have a slight decrease to marijuana enforcement. This is a per capita distribution from the state. Looking at service fees, we have a $1.1 million increase. As I stated at the beginning of the presentation, we do have increases from our interfund services. Again, this is primarily engineering design work that is charged out to our utilities and our transportation funds. We do have an $87,000 increase projected to recreation program fees. And also, I mentioned earlier, the indirect cost recovery fees of $756,000 increase. Again, this is basically a recouping of administrative services that are provided to our utilities. All other revenues, again, this is a very large and diverse source of revenues. We have a decrease of almost $3.7 million. Again, this is mostly related to capital budgets. And within this category, it's primary transfers. So we transfer from reserves that we've identified to the various funds that are actually going to purchase or build those capital projects. Also within this category is a $2.5 million reduction to Veteran Services capital funding. Within this, we have a $2 million state capital budget improvement for Veteran Services Hub, and a $500,000 tenant improvement for our contract with the federal government for the Veteran Affairs Outreach Center. So that's a one-time source of revenues. It's within this category as well. Also, kind of a miscellaneous category is beginning cash, again, related to capital, one-time capital projects that are being funded with reserves. We have a $3.3 million decrease. I'm not going to read through the list of the one-time projects from 2019, but you know, these almost add up to your $3.3 million decrease. So I do want to share some of the rationale as we think about 2020, you know, some of the kind of underlying principles that went into these projections and what was considered. So obviously the economy is the driver. You know, we talked about construction and its impact. So really our strength within our local economy has been for the last 2 years is the commercial development. I think that's going to continue through 2020. Really the big question is how long will it last? Will that actually go into 2021? Will we maintain that momentum? That's really where we need to keep an eye on is 2021 and whether we think that trend is going to continue. But that's definitely something we think will continue through 2020. There is growth in retail, as we saw from the 2.9% year-to-date increase in general merchandise stores. Steady growth, but it isn't a big dollar impact. I think it's about $51,000 increase so far year-to-date, 2019 over last year. So it's following the inflationary increase, but you know, it's not a significant dollar impact. Inflation is right where, you know, the Federal Reserve's target is. I think their target is 2%. We're at mid-year 2.2%, so Lacey is right along that target range. So, you know, a lot of our projections do look at inflation. And then really the big question is how long do we think this economic expansion is going to continue? As you heard from the city manager's presentation, we have broken the length of the expansion since the Great Depression. There are signals of a recession. You know, it's anyone's guess as to when that may occur. I don't know if that's going to be 2020, but really, again, I want to urge caution as we look at projecting revenues for next year. So let's move away from the general fund. I do want to talk about transportation. Our arterial street fund it's funded through gas tax as well as real estate excise tax. We're staying with our $2 million projection for real estate excise tax. We continue to see strong real property sales. I think and hope that will continue through 2020. But you know, that's obviously tied to what's happening in the economy in terms of whether we're in an expansion or a recession. The Transportation Benefit District, which is a voter-approved sales tax, we're projecting about $2.6 million in sales tax from this voter-approved levy or sales tax. You're going to remember that when we actually had this out on the ballot, we had about a $1.8 million projection, so we're definitely exceeding that. But again, this is the same basis as we're seeing for the city as a whole, so construction is obviously an impact to this. But again, we continue to think we'll see this higher level in 2020. I do want to look at the utilities. I mean, the council, you've seen this a few times so far, and as well as through the city manager's budget presentation. In 2020, all three utilities will see their rates expire. So we do need to take action in order to continue to collect rates for all three utilities. We are in between comp plans for the water fund. So we don't have a current comprehensive plan. In fact, we haven't for a couple of years now. You might remember in 2018 and 19, the council adopted a inflationary rate increase for water to make sure we kept up with inflation. So we're suggesting we do the same thing for 2020. We do expect the water comp plan will be completed probably in late 2020. That will include, I believe, a multi-year rate schedule for the city council to consider. The impact to the average residential customer is $1 per month more for water. A very similar situation with sewer. We are in between comp plans. What's interesting here for sewer is the next comp plan actually isn't required to be completed until 2023. But we, again, are proposing a inflationary increase to keep up with our maintenance and operation increases. Again, 3% to the average residential customer at 64 cents per month. We will take a closer look at the long-term, probably that 3-year period where we're going to have that gap of no sewer comp plan. We just want to make sure we maintain the financial strength of the utility during that period. Stormwater, again, no current comp plan. We're towards the end of that process. It's just we're not at that point where we're going to go through that public process and ready for a multi-year rate. But we've had a staff look at the comp plan. The comp plan at this point calls for anywhere between a 3 and 6% increase per year for stormwater. So this is really a compromise within that range, so 4.5% increase, which equals to 51% or 51 cents per month for the residential customer. And really the thought process, we want to keep rates level. We don't want to see spikes in a rate, so this is really to kind of buy down future rate increases. We do want rates to be predictable for both the city and the customers. So that's obviously a consideration as well when we look at these inflationary rate increases. The city is a member of LOT. LOT is Lacey Olympia Tumwater Thurston County Clean Water Alliance. Our municipal code really, we adopt or follow the rate that is adopted by the LOT board. The 2020 rate increase is 3% or $1.20 per month. We obviously want to be mindful of the cumulative impact to our residents. This is a $3.35 per month increase for the average residential account. For perspective, the 2019 increase was $3.65, so this is about 30 cents less than this year's increase. I do want to talk about the what we're calling the water quality assurance fee. This is really related to the septic tank. We want to remove septic tanks within Lacey and the UGA. So this is a fee that we've been talking about for at least a year, maybe 2 years, in terms of how do we address that problem in protecting our future water. So I do want to walk through the assumptions of this fee, and we actually have a little bit different proposal than what you saw at the city manager's budget presentation on October 24th. So when we look at the fee itself, we're looking at a fee that will be distributed amongst water and sewer customers. So I do want to show how many water customers we have in the city of Lacey as well as the UGA. We have about 25,800 water customers. We have almost 19,000 sewer customers. Our goal is to replace septic tanks with sewer at the rate of $2.5 million per year. We have a pretty large challenge in front of us, and this is really the approach, is to at least get started with putting sewer lines into the ground so that citizens have that opportunity to remove septic tanks and connect to the city system. Our first sewer septic tank elimination project is under design as we speak. Construction will be over a 3-year period starting next year, so 2020 through 2022. This is a project that we have a direct connection with polluting of the water source in this area where this project is. At the same time, we are installing or doing work on a well in this area, and obviously we don't want to install a well for polluted water, so these projects go hand in hand. So the total project for the elimination of septic tanks in this particular area is almost $18 million. So this is what we're trying to address as kind of an immediate issue. So back at the City Council annual budget workshop on October 3rd, as we started to talk about this issue and how to actually start collecting to pay for these projects, the City Council's guidance was pretty simple. Implement a phased-in approach. The council wanted to lessen the burden to the customer and to begin the fee as soon as possible. In other words, let's start addressing this issue. And obviously, we have a project in front of us, and unfortunately, that project was not considered by any of the comp plans at the time that those were developed. So this is really an unfunded project at this point. So the city manager presented a 7-year phase-in concept at the budget presentation back in October. He presented a $9.88 monthly fee to be split between water and sewer. And the rationale there was, if you look at the current project, the split between putting new pipe into the ground for sewer is about 60% of that project, and the water quality or the conversion of septic tanks is about 40% of that project, so that being assigned to water to protect that water source. Again, the phase-in period 7 years, so the phase-in period would be 2020 through 2026, so we wouldn't see the full rate being assessed to customers until 2026. And if you look at this first project in terms of a cost recovery of that first project, under this 7-year concept, it would take 10 years to pay for that project, so we actually wouldn't pay for that project until 2029. So let's look at the total collections that we project, or actually the goal would be to collect, again, $2.5 million per year. That would occur in 2026. I did include 2027 because I wanted the table here to be even, but if we implement this fee 1/7 per year up until 2026, it's about $357,000 per year. Our proposal tonight, and which is different from what we've been talking about, is a proposal to delay this implementation in 2020. So we would not assess this fee in 2020. I think the council message is to start as soon as possible, and to do that, we could fund this $357,000 through general fund reserves. So in other words, fund that with general fund revenues, transfer that over to the utilities to make sure that we keep the financial viability of the utilities intact. And really, we have 3 reasons why we're suggesting we do that. This is a very complex issue. So really, the first is we would like additional time to analyze the appropriate allocation of costs between the customers, between water and sewer, the various classifications within those 2 utilities. Again, complex, and I think it's worth taking the time to actually make sure that we have a fair, justifiable, and appropriate way to allocate those costs. As I stated earlier, the water comp plan is underway. I think that for the long-term financial look of the water fund, I think it makes sense to have the consultant incorporate this and look at that. One of my fears is we would move forward with this fee and then have the consultant come back and tell us something entirely different. So this gives us a chance to have that incorporated into the bigger picture in terms of the capital improvement program as well as the future operations of the water fund. And then again, the $357,000, while it's important to get started, it's not so significant, especially when you compare the capital project outflow of almost $18 million. We can look at reserves to fund that and get started, but really it's in terms of a cash flow, it's not going to make that much difference because the cash flow for the capital project is front-loaded, and this rate isn't going to catch up with that until the later years anyway. So So that's really a statement that we do have time to delay a year and to really dig down deep and look at this proposed fee. So as I wrap up, the next steps for the council in terms of revenues, the next meeting, which is actually a special meeting next week, November 14th, you'll see a resolution and an ordinance related to property tax. And you'll see 3 ordinances related to the wastewater, water, and stormwater rates for 2020. And of course, I have a question mark here. You, of course, could choose to move forward with the water quality assurance fee, but again, at this point, the staff recommendation is that we pause, fund that first year with reserves, and take a closer look at this throughout 2020 and come back in 2021 for the long-term fee. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Of course, the purpose of tonight is to accept any public testimony on proposed revenues, especially property tax, and for staff to receive any direction or recommendations to changes to your revenues.
Councilmember?
I just have a clarifying question, Troy. So on the 7-year water quality assurance fee process that you were showing, and then you kind of change it to, I guess, a 6-year plan, really, would you start then in the second year with the amount that would have been in the second year, or we start at the 357 in year 2? Or you really don't know yet until you have the study, I guess, right?
Right. To maintain that 7-year schedule, it would be jumping right into year 2. In other words, 2 sevenths. But we, certainly could consider and look at that. We do want to be mindful to the impact of the ratepayer. But yeah, I think that would be up for discussion, whether we start and delay the 7 years and starting in 2021, or if we start in year 2, essentially, of that schedule.
Yeah, 'cause that's my concern, is that we would hit people with a very large increase in that second year by not having that increase in the first year at all. So
Sure.
something we would have to look at.
So this is, I guess, maybe the appropriate time to bring this up, but I wonder if it would be better to look at this as like a levy rate. As the City of Lacey continues to grow, our utility tax increase should go up. And if we're looking at this total project cost, why wouldn't we just sort of assign it as almost a levy rate within our utility tax? And so as the collections grow faster, then that rate should go down. The inverse, just like we as we add more customers. For example, we're going to add all those customers into our rate paying system because they will now be paying into our utilities when they haven't currently. And so that should actually lower that rate because we're adding more customers in. If we took that approach, I think it would make more sense, and we could put over a 10-year period or wherever and just figure out what the rate is and then adjust it every year accordingly.
That's not a bad suggestion at all. So the city council has the authority to increase the utility tax rate on water, sewer, and stormwater. We could certainly look at scenarios for that. That could very well be a more fair and equitable way of distributing that to customers.
Yeah, to just have a dollar amount, but then our collections go way up because we add more customers. It just doesn't make sense.
Is that something that, as we go into next year and with the consultant working on the long-term plan, is that an option they could be looking at to kind of give us better input on that? Because that makes perfect sense.
I don't know, we've never thought of that
We are going to
before.
have more customers.
Yeah, and it has been a very consistent growing source of revenue for the city. It's linked to growth, and it's an inelastic commodity, so to speak. So it does make a lot of sense. And thinking and speaking off the cuff, that's probably about a 2% utility tax overall. But we have to narrow that down to the city-owned utilities themselves. So it's probably going to be higher than that 2%. So we collect about $6 million utility tax across the board, but we don't have the authority to increase utility tax on telephone, as an example. So it's going to be higher than that 2%, but it's certainly worth looking at, and we could certainly include that
as we grow, it should drop that rate and for everyone.
Sure.
Anyway.
We're not going to spend all the money we budgeted for this year, so there's going to be a rollover, which that could be implemented back into reserves.
Well, yeah, I think we're going to take some of those reserves that we're doing for that first year, at least to get this project
that's-
started, and then we can figure out going forward.
Precisely.
So, just to clarify for sure, so whichever we go, whether it's levy or whether we're using the reserves, whatever, the project is still on schedule, though, to get started, correct? So that they don't have to worry about their groundwater being contaminated?
That is correct. It
Okay.
is moving forward. We're under design now, and we expect
Okay.
to start that in 2020.
Well, the other reason why I like that is because if a grant comes in or something like that, we can put that in and we'll lower the rate down, you know?
Yeah.
I'm happy to do your job for you.
I was trying to refrain from making a comment. You're embarrassing me, but thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Small business at work.
Councilmember?
Kind of different small question topics here. Can the B and O tax either for, this is probably almost rhetorical, but. Probably almost rhetorical here, but can B and O tax, either for retail or services ever be tacked on to the customer? Is that illegal? No?
Well, it's a tax that's assessed against the business itself. I would say in an indirect way, that's built into the prices of the goods and
Price.
services, so it is, but it cannot be a value-added tax like the sales
Okay.
tax.
And then my next question is that one of the challenges that we may be having to our construction future is running out of buildable lands. And I'm just wondering if the next function of building up, which we're already seeing in big form, you know, in Woodland, but also on Carpenter, if the net revenue from those makes up the difference, in your opinion?
That's a little hard to predict, but I mean, certainly that is the evolution of a city, is you build up or have higher densities once you reach build out, and you also have redevelopment in other areas. But I don't want to put my my colleague on the spot who actually, you know, plans and looks at those things. But I think it's really hard to project, you know, in terms of a translation to dollars or how it may impact property and sales tax future growth.
But the tax on the build is on the, what is it based on? Certainly not acreage. It must be built on dollars or how?
Valuation, yes.
Valuation. So a building up is higher value per acre, so that theoretically could make up the difference if we're building into the air.
That's correct.
So now I'm going to turn it over to the public. Is there anyone from the public wishing to address this council on our revenues? Yes, please come forward. Can you please state your full name?
My name is Peggy Madsen. I had a couple questions. This is the first round of septic replacements, is that right?
That's correct.
For 18 million,
Correct.
17 something?
Correct.
How many septic tanks are there that need to be replaced in Lacey?
I believe in the UGA it's around 10,000.
10,000.
11,000.
So how many does this replace in the first round?
500, 400.
450-ish.
450? So
Not more than 500.
how long does it take to do the project?
This is.
I mean, we're paying
this-
for it over 10 years.
Correct. It's about a 3-year project.
3-year build? And how many other phases? And I understand this first round is based on that well number, whatever it is, the contamination. How many other rounds are on the drawing board?
At this point, we don't have anything identified. This is going to take roughly the first 10 years of this fee. So we have, you know, like I said, we really haven't identified a specific project for round 2, which would be, you know, 10 years down the road.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
I mean, we're looking at, you know,
Critical
aquifer
areas.
sensitive areas. So, you know, there is some science and considerations in terms of where we would go next.
Right. So it's essentially based on crisis. management, right? Okay.
Correct.
Great, that was, I just had questions, thank you.
Thank you
Just
for
for
your questions.
clarification, because
Yeah.
I think this is kind of part of what you're asking, is when we've talked about this in the past, as far as how long of a time frame for a full conversion, we're talking 80 plus, 80, 100 years.
Yeah,
It's long term.
453 years for 450.
And $270 million of today's money.
Yeah.
And we all will.
Councilmember.
Just an interesting note, building up also doesn't negatively impact these things because the sewer's already there. Just a point of note.
I do have one question on your presentation. It shows a major franchise fee decrease. Have we finished the franchise agreement with Comcast? Is that what you're basing that off of?
No, well, I mean, it's a trend analysis. So, I mean, the answer to your first question is no, we do not have the franchise agreement completed yet.
Do we have an idea of where that's going to go? Because wouldn't that have a major change in our budget
It
projections?
shouldn't. We're not anticipating a change to the franchise fee rate.
Okay.
But, I mean, this is also, I think, a little bit tied into just the way people are using data as well. I mean, I think there is a shift from traditional TV to streaming. That's really anecdotal on my part, but I think there is a shift to
what's happening?
streaming technologies for instead of cable. So, so we are seeing declining revenues from that source as well.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
There was only one comment.
Yeah, is there anyone else wishing to comment from the public? Okay, anyone from the council? Do we have some agreement that we're going to, in year one, we'll use reserves and then we'll figure this out going forward? Maybe looking at the,
Or some combination of.
Do you need a motion, or do you want thumbs
That's
up?
just,
or-
just not, right?
just a hearing?
Okay.
Okay, then I'm going to close this public hearing on revenue sources. And now next up, I'm going to open up the hearing on the budget. Back to Troy.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. This is your first of two public hearings on the budget as a whole. Your next hearing is scheduled for November 14th, next week at the special meeting. Again, I'm going to focus on the general fund. I think this is the fund or the part of the budget I think citizens most identify with, you know, police, transportation, engineering, parks and recreation, city council, administrative services. So, you know, again, I will focus my comments there. So again, the purpose of tonight is to present budget information as well as accept public comment, and for you, the city council, to provide any direction if you have any changes that you would like to make to the proposed budget. So here is your total 2020 proposed budget. This is a change from the printed budget. Again, the property tax change affected that, and I mean, we do have 3 additions to the budget that the city manager mentioned during his presentation. There were last-minute additions to the budget that these are now accounted for in the budget, and I do have details on those projects later on in the presentation. But your proposed 2020 budget at this point is $156,410,821. This is roughly a $2 million decrease. That's about 1.3%. The main reasons for the decrease, again, are capital. As you heard in the revenue hearing, we have a smaller capital budget, which is, you know, really reflected here. I have a slide, a detailed slide for the general fund, so I won't make any comments on the general fund at this point. But if you look at capital projects, we have a $1.6 million decrease projected for 2020. This is really your College and Yelm Super T project within the Transportation Benefit District funding. This year, that's about a $6.5 million project. The 2020 overlay project is about a $2.1 million project, so it's about a $4 million difference. You also, within this category, you have the continuation of the College and 26 roundabout, as well as a roundabout at Hawks Prairie and Marvin Road. Looking at your utilities, really what's driving the change in these budgets is capital. That's the most significant fluctuation. The water fund, looking at the water fund, there again is the septic tank project is in that number, so it's a pretty significant number. Not much changes, of course, changes within the projects for wastewater, but overall the dollar change isn't that significant. And then stormwater, we don't really have any significant projects scheduled for next year. So we had 3 different projects in stormwater this year, and again, nothing significant in stormwater for 2020. And then in your internal service funds, these are your fleet or your equipment rental fund, as well as your IT or information services fund, and that's again related to capital. So these are capital replacements of existing equipment. Here's really the same information in graph form. I think it's interesting that utilities is over 50% of the budget. In fact, it's 51% of the proposed budget. And if you break down utilities even a little bit more, if you just look at the construction budget, it's $35 million for next year. That's about 22.5% of the total budget. So certainly a significant portion of the budget. Capital projects coming in at $17.5 million. The good news is that, the budget continues to think to the future. We're continuing to invest in the community as well as preserving the assets we have. So I feel pretty good about what we're proposing. So let's look at the general fund. Again, this is the fund that provides the services I think our citizens most identify with. Here are the general fund departments. I'd like to touch on the more significant variances. I do want to talk about contracted services, so that's your second department that's listed there. It's a decrease of $112,000 almost. Really, this is we're creating a new department for social services, and that's really a transfer of those contracted services into that new fund. So that we're not really seeing a decrease, but just a shifting of where we're accounting for that. You do have a new social services budget. This is showing a decrease of almost $1.9 million. And I go back to the revenue hearing where I talked about the $2 million that's coming from the state to improve the exterior of the Veterans Hub, as well as the $500,000 from the federal government for the Veteran Outreach Center. So those are counted in 2019. We're going to carry funds over. Those projects aren't going to be complete in 2019, so it's really a timing issue you're seeing in that decrease there. We do have a $1.7 million increase to police. We're seeing the most significant change to this department, and I do have slides that show details of that, but in effect, we're adding 11 positions in this department, 3 of which we added mid-year this year, but we're going to see the full impact of 3 positions, as well as 8 new positions within this department for 2020. Parks and Recreation, we have about a $260,000 increase. The most significant change within this budget is we have $100,000 in there for community outreach and engagement. This is a council initiative that they wanted to see, so we're moving forward with that in 2020. And then you have the most significant change within the general fund, capital and transfers. Again, that is related to a decrease in capital projects and the funding coming from reserves and transfers, so about a $4.3 million decrease to this category. So I do want to talk about workforce considerations. As I alluded to in the previous slide, public safety is where we're seeing the most significant changes. So for 2020, the proposed budget includes 3 new officers for what we're calling succession planning. So looking ahead to our police department, we have a significant number of officers that will be eligible for retirement, and we're trying to get ahead of that. So it's a long lead time to get a new officer onto the streets protecting our citizens, and we want to be in front of that rather than seeing a decrease to our force. We want to hire ahead to really address that long lead time. So there are 3 positions included for that, and we do have reserves that are identified for those 3 officers for the next 3 years. We have 2 new officers that will be added to our Community Resources Unit. This is really a new division within our police department to help deal with social issues, more interaction with the neighborhoods, really more interaction with the community as a whole. So that's going to be 2 additional officers, so we'll have 3 officers total for that purpose. With new officers and just kind of a growing community, we have to address administrative needs. So we have an executive assistant within the police department budget being proposed for next year, as well as a administrative person for the new community resources unit. So this is an equivalent of a department assistant 3 within the police department. We do have one other workforce enhancement, and that is within our facilities maintenance division of the general fund. We only have 2 full-time FTEs at the current moment to maintain several buildings within the city's infrastructure. Very hard to keep up, so we're basically converting a part-time position to a full-time position for 2020. Normally, we have some separation between the revenue hearing and the kind of general hearing on the budget. So I do have a couple slides on general fund revenues. I won't spend a lot of time. This is an exact copy of the slide you just saw about 20 minutes ago or so. But again, we're seeing an overall decrease to revenues, but we're seeing increases, significant increases to sales tax as well as our service fees within our general fund. Again, same slide for general fund revenues as a percentage of the entire budget. Again, you're seeing 60% of the budget coming from taxes and 21% from service fees or recouping fees from citizens for direct services. I do want to alert the council and the public to some structural changes within the budget. It's hard to see those within a document themselves, so I do want to explain some of those changes. The first is the social services department that we talked about earlier. Brand new department. This is an almost $881,000 department. This is becoming a significant portion of what we're providing to the public. It's time to account for it separately. This is going to be something we're going to have to allocate revenues to, so it makes sense to create a new department. So within that department, or that $880,000, there's $564,000 for homelessness services. Within that $560,000, there's $103,000 for a social navigator. This is going to be a partnership with the Community Action Council. There's $150,000 for an encampment cleanup service contract. There is $55,000 for family support services, and there's $200,000 in there for the Carpenter Road stabilization site. And I'd certainly acknowledge that that's an evolving solution there, and $200,000 may not be the number, but that at this point is the placeholder for that. We're moving veteran services into this new department. This was previously in our public affairs division. Steve Kirkman is our staff liaison within that department, but it makes more sense to put this into social services. There isn't really an increase to this budget. This is really just shifting from public affairs into this new department. And then we have miscellaneous social services. This is primarily those contracted services that I mentioned in the general slide that I showed earlier. So you have within here, you have the Health and Human Services Council contribution. This is a sales tax contribution, is now in this new budget. Our contributions to Together and Grub, and there's also the dollars that we have earmarked for emergency cold sheltering. So again, this is what makes up your new social services department.
Troy, could I ask a quick question?
Of course.
On the emergency cold weather shelter, do we actually have a dollar amount in that?
I believe it's $50,000 is in that.
Okay. Is that
Yeah, that's correct. That's going to Salvation Army.
right? Okay, thank you.
Of course. Another structural change we have within your 2020 budget is a change to administrative services. This was a fairly recent change. We combined two departments, and we're actually going back to the old methodology. So administrative services for 2 years included human resources, public affairs, and city clerk. So just within some organizational changes, we're separating human resources from that department. So now you see within the budget, human resources as a department and public affairs and city clerk as a separate department. This is kind of a structural change, but it's really more of a heads up, I think, to the council. So we're changing the way we're handling transfers. So we do have a fund, Parks and Open Space. This was identified and used to develop parks and to acquire future park lands. The landscape is changing a little bit. We're moving more towards development, and some of the funding change, we've seen some funding changes. So we used to fund this priority with utility tax, but due to budget constraints, we've moved those utility taxes for the operations of parks. So it's really kind of a final acknowledgement of that. We were transferring utility tax into this fund and then transferring it back to the general fund for the operations of the Rainier Vista Park. So we're proposing to not do those transfers, so that lowers our budget. It was really just kind of an accounting follow the bouncing ball type of action, as well as transfers that come from this fund into the RAC. So this is still occurring in 2020, but this is really more of a look to the future. 2021, I think, will not include those transfers. So this, as you might remember back in 2009 when we started the operations of the RAC, this was a joint venture between the city and the county. We negotiated a transfer of the full responsibilities of RAC operations to the city back in 2010. There was a financial settlement for that, so the city received some funds for accepting the full responsibility of that RAC. And we've been using that fund to supplement the shortfalls or the basically subsidizing the operation of the RAC since that time. And this is the last year of that funding. So in 2021, we're going to have to look at higher subsidies from the general fund, and it really eliminates the need to account for those operations within the Parks and Open Space. So that will be a challenge that we'll need to address in 2021. We've been funding that about $200,000 per year from that financial settlement. So that's certainly a $200,000 shortfall we'll have to address next year. I do want to point out some of our significant budget initiatives, and this is really a celebration of what's included in the budget. So next year we have the design of the new museum. This is a fully funded project. We have about $800,000 in 2020. We're already underway, so that's a 100% grant. We're actually matching that with kind of in-kind labor. We're continuing with the second phase of the police department space needs analysis. We've certainly outgrown the police station, and we need to look to the future and address that, and this is really the next step in moving towards that and identifying what the recommendation will be for the police station. The final synthetic fields are being replaced at the RAC. Fields number 5 and the soccer field. This is about $800,000. This is really actually good news. We managed to replace all the fields. We were a little surprised that we were replacing them so soon. We thought we'd get 15-year life out of those fields. We got 10. But we identified reserves. We managed to replace all of those, and hopefully we'll get another 10 years. The good news is we still have reserves left. We have about $2.4 million left in reserves, which happen to be about the cost to replace these fields. I think our original outlook, we thought we were going to have to make improvements or replace the drainage features of these synthetic fields, and when actually we got to the project, those are still in great shape, and we didn't have to invest in replacing the drainage and the the understructure of those fields, so that was a savings for us. So again, good news. So we should be in good shape for the next 8 to 10 years. The transportation shop replacement is included in the 2020 budget again, so this is actually in the 2019 budget, but the majority of the project will happen next year. We have about $200,000 in the budget to improve the library. These are front desk improvements as well as some restroom improvements. It's been a long time since we've actually made improvements to that. I think the library will be gaining efficiencies and we'll be able to serve the public better with these improvements. We have 2 playground structures budgeted for next year. We have the train depot structure. This is a joint project with the Rotary Club. Of course, it's going at the train depot location as well as we have the Bush Park replacement of the playground structure. And we're going to do something very similar to what we did with Wonderwood, which is to engage the public and have a public vote as what they would like to see in terms of that structure. Some other initiatives, we're kind of shifting to transportation utilities, so we're going to continue with the College and 26 roundabout project. That should be completed next year. That's $4.4 million. We have the Hawks Prairie and Marvin Road roundabout, $2.5 million for next year. We have the Rudder Road sidewalk and retaining wall project. That's really to fix and improve the sidewalk in a certain stretch of Rudder Road, so about $941,000. Next year's overlay project will be in the Northeast Lacey area, so that will be Meridian Road, and that will include the Orion and Meridian roundabout, about $2.1 million. Again, thank you to the citizens of Lacey for voting for that source of revenue. Utilities, there's a long list of utility projects, but the most significant coming from the first septic to sewer project is really kind of the most significant project we're looking at. As I promised earlier, we'll come back to the changes to the proposed budget, and those are changes to what's been printed in the printed budget. We have, as we mentioned during the revenue hearing, we do have a minor change to the property tax projection, and here are the 3 projects that were late additions to the budget that weren't included in the printed budget, but they are included in the numbers that you saw tonight. So we have $50,000 for the Lacey Midtown amenities. This is an economic development initiative for the council. This is being funded through an identified reserve. We have a communications audit, which will lead to a communications plan for the city. So this is professional services. This is $75,000 that's been included. We want to also celebrate the accomplishment of this community. We managed to document 100,000 acts of compassion, and this is going to be a public art project. This is also coming from reserves. We have been collecting reserves for the last couple of years at a rate of $1 per capita, so that is funding this project. So reaching the end of my comments, overall the budget, we're continuing to, I think, meet the community's expectations in terms of service levels. This really is a good news budget. We're addressing many issues. We're thinking about the future. We're maintaining, again, what I think the customers expect. Do want to close with what to expect throughout the rest of the budget schedule. Again, next week is a relatively big meeting for the City Council. We're going to have our final public hearing. We're going to have the council consider the actions for the 2020 property tax, as well as 3 ordinances related to utility tax rates. And we are on track to adopt the 2020 budget on December 5th. So again, the purpose of tonight's hearing is to accept public comment and to receive any direction the City Council may have as what they would like to see in terms of changes to the budget. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
So actually, I'll get started first. One of the new additions to this is the $75,000 for the Public Affairs Department audit and for the development of a communications plan. I don't particularly want to wait till next year to get that process started. I think it's important that we get going on that as soon as possible, because I do think there is a huge need to address some of our communications, our lack of communications and increased public outreach, and how we can better communicate with the public on major issues. And hopefully that's what this audit plan will do, but I would not want it to wait till next year to get started on that. Is there any way we can move that forward, City Manager?
So the thought process on that one is it would be professional services. So there's no reason why we can't start the RFP process, request for proposals, get that queued up, and not actually wait until January 1. So that would give us at least almost 2 months head start on that. More than likely take about 90 days once that contract has been let. And so by the end of first quarter, we'd have a comprehensive plan. I think one of the outcomes that we want is a communication strategy, but also identify some other tools to enhance really our communications infrastructure.
Where's the council on this?
Put the RFP out.
Yeah.
Makes
No
sense.
reason to
I'd
wait.
support moving on that as fast as possible, too.
Great.
Selling the sleeves off your vest, we're good.
Thank you. I thank you. I appreciate that. I know we've had some few conversations of how important it is that we get going on this, and we come up with some solutions. So, Council, Deputy Mayor.
So I know it hasn't been specifically identified, but we're in the middle of our regional climate mitigation plan, and they keep talking about early actions. And is there a way to, and I know we have reserves, but if things come up that isn't specifically identified in the budget, is there a way to make sure that we can move forward with some of those actions?
We could certainly use the amendment process, so we like to amend the budget once per year, but what we've done historically is, as those emerging issues come before the council and staff, we've been reporting those out to the Finance and Economic Development Committee. That way we, keep the integrity of budget intact, as well as communicate to the council and public. So we could certainly react at any moment to those emergent issues through that process.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman.
So, a couple of questions for you, Troy. Super excited to hear that we're going to add some staff to our police department. I think that's critical. But a couple of questions on that. You mentioned 11 positions, but I only saw 7 on the slide, as I recall.
So you are correct.
Okay. I thought my math was, I thought I could do the simple math at least.
Yeah, so we did some mid-year actions this year, so a new deputy chief as well as 3 new positions to really round out our ability to serve, and adding a 4th quadrant to the city's patrol. So that happened in 19, but it was only a partial year.
Right.
So in terms of the dollars, the full impact is your 11 employees, but it's not necessarily new. They're new for 19, but the dollar impact is certainly going to be felt in its entirety in 2020.
Okay, great. And then along on that, how many of those new officers are filling vacant spots rather than actually adding additional officers? Because I know we had some vacant spots, right? We had some spots that needed to be filled. How many additional officers are we actually adding?
So the spots that are being added in 2019, to our budget director's comment, 3 of them were being added for the increase in population and proposed annexation. That was the mid-year in 2019 adjustment. And then we were still 3 officers behind between 2018 and 2019 playing catch-up with our shortage. So there's 6 officers there. And then moving forward to next year in 2020, there's 2 new officers being proposed for the Community Resource Officer Unit, and then 3 additional for succession planning for the anticipation of 3 retiring officers. So that's how you get the total of 11. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And so we're really increasing our actual police force by about 8 officers. And then a few are going to fill in for some retirements.
Correct.
But, okay, that's great. Thank you. And then just one other question, which was on one of the play structure. They had $100,000 on there for the train depot plane structure. play structure. Is that 100,000? I know the Rotary Club is that 50,000 of that is theirs, or is that 100 plus the 50 from Rotary?
Plus 50.
Yeah.
So it is 150 for the play structure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The Lacey City, the Lacey Rotary is putting in the 50,000.
Right, but it is 100,000 of taxpayer money. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember?
Back to the police, is there, I bet there's a policing number that states officers per capita where it's the safest and where it prevents the most crime just by presence?
One
What
per
do your
thousand?
numbers show nationally or whatever?
So Lacey's currently behind, or so a Washington trend. We had to go by Washington than nationally. And that number is one of a number of different data sets that are used nationally by law enforcement. It's just simply not officers per thousand. There's a lot of other things that go into it. Currently, I think we're about 10.1. I believe that the Washington average is about 10.5.
But at a certain, with all those variables, is it not true that officer presence actually decreases crime rates?
That's true.
So I have, no problem.
It doesn't decrease dropping
I was trying
things,
to turn
though.
off my iWatch that was beeping and my phone went off, so, yeah. Anyway, just a couple things for the council that I think we need to talk about. We're still in our hearing process. The hearing's open.
Well, we need to open to the public after you're done with your.
Yeah, I opened it up at the beginning, so we're in it. One was that maybe it's a couple months ago now that the Washington Center came to us and asked us to look at their big project, their remodel project, and we haven't addressed this at all in this budget. I have a letter here that's addressed to this council with a specific proposal, and so I would like to at least talk about that maybe at some more length next meeting and get it on the agenda so we can at least have a conversation of how we're going to move forward with that request. I know that this council was generally supportive, but we hadn't worked out any of the details. And so hopefully we can do that maybe next week.
Can you share that letter with us, please?
Yes,
I mean, I don't
And
mean
how
now.
much?
Sure.
I mean, if we can get it electronically so we can.
sure. Happy to do that. So that's just one consideration that we haven't addressed in this budget.
The ask was for all the local municipalities, correct?
They are, there's an ask for all. They have a specific ask from Lacey, and so I'd like to address that ask at some point, and we can discuss it, next week. The other part is going back into our new social services department. Is that what we're calling it? No. Correct. Social services department. I'm wondering if we should have a line item in there for emerging issues. It just seems like there's always something that comes up that we didn't expect to happen, and that we need to react to. And we've always have typically reacted to that by a budget amendment, which is not how I particularly like to do business. I'd rather have an idea of what we could handle through emerging issues. For example, there's been a request for Build-A-Bus. And so as these issues come up, it'd be nice if there was a way to address it and a process to address it within that department.
Well, I'll defer to council on this, but there was originally, when we did the budget, we thought there was going to be $200,000 for a regional effort on the Carpenter site, and that's probably at a pause. It maybe not be going forward. So there is a dollar amount there that if council wanted flexibility to, in a sense, to your point, Mayor, to have a flexible emerging issue amount.
So can we maybe, I don't know.
None?
Please.
My concern with an emerging issue line item, I guess, would be, would the individual items still come back before us? I mean, the way it is now under the amendment process, it comes before this council to decide. I wouldn't want there to be some fudge number there, basically, that isn't coming back before the elected body.
No, I think that's a good point, and I agree. I think whenever emergency issue comes up, it needs to have some council approval to go forward.
And that's why I don't know that it needs a budget line item the way we do it currently, I think works because we do it through the amendment process and we can address those issues. I mean, I'm open to other ways. I just don't want it to be anything that isn't going to come before this body.
Yeah, my only point was there would be capacity in that fund, that social service account. So if something did come up that council wanted to address, and you're right, it would have to come to council, be deliberation about it, and ultimately in some kind of contract for services, you have that ability.
Council want to weigh in on any of that?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of unanticipated costs coming up this year, and I think we need to have a line item identified in the budget so we're not having to pull it out of other places.
Well, and
You'd have a general intent.
the reason why
behind it, too.
I like the line item is because in some ways I would like to have a cap, well, or at least an idea of where we're at.
Right.
If not necessarily a cap, but at least an idea, because we could be here. There's so many issues out there that it could go on forever and ever and ever, and we have to have some idea within our budget of what we're going to do with this. So
I'd like
thought process. Sure, Councilmember.
I'd like to have, considerable weigh-in from the finance director before we make those kind of decisions, being that, and the city manager.
Deputy Mayor?
So, I think we could argue for a line item for a number of things. I brought up the climate mitigation plan, and we can do a budget amendment. So if we do a line item for this, well, it seems like it's balancing the same type of thing. What do you weigh as needing a emergency line item for which thing, kind of a thing? So
I'm that's fine.
yeah.
I was just throwing it out there, seeing where the council's at. No problem. Councilmember?
Since we're talking about social services, what I would like to see here is we gave $250,000 to Family and Youth Services here. And I'm wondering where that's expressed here, and our contribution to what's being called Genesis House now, and other sorts of contributions to the community for youth and family services for people experiencing homelessness. I don't see that expressed here, and I would like to see something allocated toward that portion of social services.
So I think the finance director kind of mentioned those, but those were 2019 initiatives, so the $250,000 will be transferred in the future once we get costs and reimbursement through North Thurston Public Schools. We are working with St. Mark's Lutheran Church as well as Homes First and North Thurston Education Foundation on a potential house to house young adults. And so that is in play, but again, that was a 2019 expenditure. More than likely be a carryover of 2020, but it's not necessarily articulated in the 2020 budget.
So understanding that, if we were to suggest line items for certain things, it would be, I think, part of the characteristic of Lacey to show that sort of line item as a transparency to the citizens of Lacey to say we are making steps in this direction. It might be nice for people to be able to see that in our budget moving forward.
Councilmember?
Just a quick question for the city manager. It'll be Lacey's turn in 2020 to distribute the community development block grant dollars.
That is correct.
That is a good call.
Can you tell me when, will it be in the first quarter sometime, or?
So
Is that expressed in this budget as well?
So that's a great question. So it's the reason it's not expressed in the budget because the money actually gets funneled through Thurston County.
Right.
So, but we are given the legislative authority to direct those funds, and then we communicate that to Thurston County, and that's how they're spent. We typically are notified the first quarter of how much that dollar amount is. In the past, it's been around $800,000 to maybe close to $900,000. And council goes through a very deliberative process. They receive applications, and then you make a final decision that's articulated to the county.
So that would play out over?
I want going by previous years, by early next year, and by mid next year, it will be completed, that process.
Okay.
That seems about right. It seems
Yep.
like it was like
I think so.
It's done by
February,
July,
March,
August.
and then we went through that process.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, now it's time for the public. Is there anyone from the public wishing to address this council on the 2020 budget? And we did have one person signed up, please. Okay.
I'm not going to read all of this for you tonight, but I have read it at home. So my name is Kate Berry, and I live in Lacey. I'm not going to, I actually am very impressed with this budget. I tried really hard to find fault with it, and I couldn't. But I want to thank Mr. Spence and Mr. Wu. I did have some questions, and they were very responsive to me on those questions. And tonight you've answered, Mr. Wu, you've answered quite a few of the questions that I actually had. I really like the conservative nature of how this city runs its finances, and I would like to see that continue on into the future, particularly as we are likely to see a potential recession or at least a slowdown in the economy. And I think it's always prudent to be a saver, not a spender, when we think that things could change in the future. And if things don't change, then we just have a little extra money in our pocket at the end of the day. A couple of things I just wanted to mention, and one of them is the dreaded amended budget. And I noticed in 2019 there were a few categories, not many, but a few categories that were amended quite a bit. I mean, the dollar amount went up quite a bit. And I'm not saying that those weren't justified amendments, but what I would like to ask you to do is to think very carefully, especially about discretionary spending, the feel-good spending, the nice-to-have, the make the community all warm and fuzzy kind of spending, and to think really carefully about that, because something might only be $50,000 or $100,000 here or there, but those add up really quickly. And before you know it, that extra money that we have in our pocket is gone. And it's just it's a scary thing to start thinking as we go along, well, we'll just amend the budget and do this, and we could end up in the red, and I'd hate to see that happen. I did notice at the last meeting we'd talked about, and there was a community grant program, and I think it's budgeted for about $50,000 in the budget. And I really think that that's a great program, but I would like to ask you to consider to put some criteria around that, and that the criteria be adding value to our communities, value that brings people together. Programs like tree plantings or community gardens or things that really increase the quality of life for our citizens. I was a little disturbed to hear, and I may have heard it wrong, that HOAs were applying so that they could repair or replace signs in the communities. And I don't really see how that adds any value. The HOA, I happen to pay money every month to an HOA, and that's supposed to be in their budget. And it just seems as a taxpayer, I'm paying for that through my HOA, and then I'm paying for it as a taxpayer too. So I'm getting hit twice. And I just don't think that that's an appropriate use of that money. I'm glad you answered the question about Carpenter Road stabilization, the $200,000 that was earmarked for that, since I had read from the Thurston County that was a dead deal, not going to happen. Nice to see that we're going to think of something else we can use that money for. The playground structures that you're talking about, I'd just like to ask you to consider making those playground structures accessible. I saw the little pictures, and they may not have been what the actual site's going to look like, but you know, there are children who do use wheelchairs, there are children who have mobility challenges, and I'd like to make sure that playgrounds in the future are accessible to those children. And that's really, other than to say thank you for making me feel good about where my tax dollars are going, those were just the only little comments that I had for you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr.
And
Mayor?
thank you for the comments. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
May I ask a question of the citizen? Do you have a financial background?
I do.
Oh, What
Yeah, I have
type?
a master's in finance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm not a boring person, though, so.
Never said
Sorry,
you were.
Mr. Wu.
Very professional. I'm sure he cuts loose off the hours, but I really appreciate your comments, and if the council may, I would really like to hear prepared responses to all of our comments at the next meetings. That'd be great.
Talk to it, yeah.
Sorry to add your workload.
Jen, the new playgrounds that were done this year were handicapped accessible, correct? Weren't they?
They were.
The one, there were 2 replacements at Wonderwood, and one of them is more, they're both accessible, but one of them was geared more toward people with disabilities, so.
And those parks also went through a community discussion. They were presented to the community, and the community chose those parks. So yes, absolutely in line with that.
Is there anyone else from the public, please?
I just have a couple of questions. The roundabout at Hawks Prairie and Marvin Road, I thought the developer was paying for that.
Scott?
So there is traffic mitigation frontages along Marvin that developer is responsible for building, but the roundabout is not their frontage, and they are not responsible for that. They approached us about building it. You know, there's other traffic mitigation fees that are involved, but they wanted to build it at an accelerated schedule, and it's kind of a win-win. So, yeah, so that does come out of our budget, because it was not part of the requirement for their mitigation to build. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, but they said that, didn't they say it was included in the money that they were spending on the?
It's in our budget. And there again, they, in addition to their frontages, they have traffic mitigation fees, regular traffic mitigation fees that they pay, and then additional truck route mitigation fees that they pay. And those fees can go towards their frontage improvements. And if the fees are above and beyond that, you know, then it can be applied to this roundabout. But I guess the message I wanted to deliver is that they are not required to build that roundabout as mitigation for their project.
Okay, got it. All right, and the 50,000 to Salvation Army for cold weather shelters, can you talk about that at all?
So Salvation Army did a major upgrade to their facility. Actually, last year, they approached the council about needing help because they've had a lack of support for operations. They have new beds, actually a total of 30, 20 for men and 10 for women. And so that is now open from November until, I believe, March. And so that's what that support is. I know the other jurisdictions have also supported similar amounts.
Okay, all right, perfect, thank you.
May I add to that, please? Yep. This council's made it pretty clear over the last work sessions, too, that any type of supportive housing like that, we'd like to see standards and, support. And the Salvation Army has a well over 150-year history of all of that. So it's a good placement based on the council's wishes.
Absolutely, thank you.
Is there anyone else, please?
My name is Wayne Olson. I was very heartened by the comments and the questions from
Mr. Olson,
Mayor Pratt.
Mr. Olson, could you please state where you live, what town you reside from?
At Panorama in Lacey. And as a new resident in the area, that I'm not as up to date or knowledgeable yet in terms of what capabilities and what areas of climate change that the city has already put into place. Considering, I'd like to know if they do have the information at this point in terms of how far along you have gone in terms of solar panels making use on southern exposures of the city property, and then also of vehicles and your replacement plan for vehicles, of making use of hybrid electric, electric vehicles. This is an area that is near and dear to my heart as a instructor at part-time at Pierce College of teaching climate change, as well as 30 years in the military as oceanography meteorology background. So I certainly encourage the city to consider as many options as possible of making use of not only a investment in terms of future and reduction of your prices. For example, what sort of price do you pay for electricity, assume from Puget Sound Energy? Is that area in terms of a reduction of that or even elimination of that? Where I lived previously, I had installed solar panels on my house, and after the first 5 months, I had no electricity bill. In fact, where I had extra energy produced, getting the Washington State incentive for production on that, which would have paid for a Model S for 10,000 miles a year. So I don't see any reason why everybody doesn't do it if you have a good southern exposure for solar panels, and then making use of that extra energy you produce for reducing your costs. So that's all that's I'd like to say at this point in terms of encouraging, always thinking in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Wade. Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else wishing to address this council?
So may I just address the council? Actually, because I'm on several energy committees, I met actually with PSE's communications director, Kelsey Hulse, and they are going to be putting in EV charging stations all around Midtown, around the hub particularly and stuff. So that's a positive thing, and because she said that Lacey actually fit the profile of being able to do this, and we're one of the higher, we're higher up on the scale of which cities to do that. But also, next week, I'm actually going to look at the city's wind farm that we bought into on the border, and I'll go on a tour there as well. So there's another things. Plus, you probably remember that we do have a buildings need to be at least solar ready. You need to be able to, because the bracing, if they're not ready to hold panels, it won't work. So I'm just want to throw that out.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to address the council? Seeing none, I am in close this first 2020 budget public hearing. And next, I'm going to open up the public hearing on the Hicks Lake Management District Assessment Reduction. And it's Tom.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Tonight's Hicks Lake Management District public hearing concerns the district's request to lower their annual assessments. So, a little brief history. The Lake Management District was formed by the council in October of 2015, and then assessments began in 2016. During that first year, a lake management plan was developed that would address the problematic noxious weeds and other undesired vegetation around the lake. Then lake treatments began in 2017 and 18 and 19, so it's been going on for 3 years. Overall, the Lake Management District and the residents there are very happy with the condition of the lake. This is one of the photos that we received recently from our contractor that's treating the lake, Northwest Aquatics Ecosystems. And I invite anybody that's interested in watching the progress over the last 3 years to go to theirs on YouTube. He's documented a lot of photos and videos of the lake and the changes that have occurred over the last 3 years. So overall, the Lake Management District has 119 lakefront lots, and 64 of them are in the Weatherwood subdivision that share a community park with access on the frontage of the lake. So this is the Weatherwood community there. So on the assessment adjustments, after collecting assessments for the last 4 years, the district would like to reduce the assessments by 10%. This involves, for an improved lot, basically a lakefront lot with a house on it already, it would reduce it 10% from 300 to 270. For unimproved lots, it would reduce from 150 to 135. For the Weatherwood community, the assessment would reduce from 25 to 2250. And then the other lots in there would just reduce by 10% as well. That's the Lacey has the Wanchers Park, and Fish and Wildlife has the boat launch. And then there's the Christian Church property there. They have a higher assessment too because of the number of people that access the lake there. Overall, it reduces the roll. If we did a 10% reduction from $48,021.25 a year down to $43,219.12 for 2020. The Lake Management District does have sufficient resources at this current time and to cover any unanticipated costs that could come up in the next year or two. And so they're going to continue to review their reserves at the end of each year and possibly do further reductions next year and the year after that. So to meet the requirements of the public hearing tonight, we did send out notices to all of the property owners advising them of the public meeting tonight. We published a legal notice in the paper on October 22nd and 23rd for tonight's public hearing. And just a note, the assessment is due to the county on November 15th. The county does collect the money for the district as part of the property taxes, and then they forward the money to the city of Lacey, and we keep their money here and manage their contracts and stuff for them. So the funds stay here, but it's pretty much for their use. So later in the agenda, we'll ask you to consider a resolution number 1080 that would adopt the new revised assessment roll. That's all I have, unless there are any questions. I also have Danny Kaiser here. He's president of the Lake Management District. If you have any questions for him, or he can help me out if any tough questions come up from you.
Just a comment, not a question. I mean, this is a great example of a group who has imposed on themselves an assessment to take care of a problem, has shown great fiscal responsibility, and has actually banked enough money that they can afford to lower the dues. This is pretty much a no-brainer.
Absolutely.
I almost couldn't add to that, but they also got stuff done, and they improved the lake. So they accomplished the goal. But it's also a great example, too, of how oversight from the county and from the city of Lacey certainly was part of the success.
And that lake has really improved in quality. I've been out on it, all summer long, and it has really made a big difference there. So
I'd really like, if I could, down the road, circle back and look to this committee to lead and advise others that might want to do similar good things, other lake district.
yeah. Is there anyone from the public wishing to address council? Seeing none, I'm going to close this public hearing on the Hicks Lake Management District.
Thank you very much.
And now on to resolutions. And our first resolution is the resolution relating to the Hicks Lake Management District.
I moved that City Council approve the proposed resolution 1080 approving and confirming the special assessment role for Hicks Lake Management District Number 1.
It's been moved and
That's an
seconded.
easy
Is there
second.
Any discussion?
This is
Seeing
a
none,
great
all in
thing.
favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Next up is the city manager's report.
So there's Honorable Mayor and City Council, there's a number of items before you, actually four. First off is the Thurston Community Media 2020-22 operating agreement proposal. Mr. Kerben's going to provide that brief to council.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before you this evening is a proposal to authorize the city manager to enter into a 3-year operating agreement with Thurston Community Media. Since 1986, the city has contracted with TC Media to manage community access television on Lacey's behalf. The operating agreement covers all services provided by TCTV, including studio operation, production, and administrative services. And you all know, but I'll just state it for the public record, the cities of Olympia and Tumwater and Thurston County have similar arrangements with TC Media as well. Our current agreement expires on the 31st of this year, December 31st, and so we're proposing we re-enter into a 3-year agreement with several 1-year options that if both parties agree, we can extend it, which, as you know, we've done several times. This does include a adjustment to the base rate. We've been sort of just using the CPI for 20 years probably now. And as you know, with your own wrestling with the budget, medical costs, and all those types of things that grow faster than the inflation rate, TC Media is faced with the same challenges. And it's time to kind of just bring them back up to par again with what actual costs in the world are really doing for operating an organization. So we're recommending that. So that would actually bring our new base year, which would be 2020, to $120,000. And then we would start using the Seattle, I always want to say Bremerton, but now it's Bellevue, Tacoma CPI for years beyond that.
Are you done? I was going to make a motion.
Oh, you guys know all this,
Yes,
so
we
I
all
can
know
be
about
done.
this.
If
Make
you
the
want to be
motion.
done and it's getting late, I'm happy to do that.
I would make a motion to authorize the city manager to enter into the 2020 through 2022 operating agreement with Thurston County Media.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councilmember.
Could you speak to what technology changes have occurred? I mean, the medium of television certainly is changing.
Yeah, you know, it's, so things that have occurred that we've actually been able to facilitate is new HD equipment here. The same at the studio. If you haven't been up there for a while, it'd be worth going and taking a tour. They're pretty much all HD throughout the facility now, which was a big step and an expensive step for them. Unfortunately, a lot of the backbone system is still not all HD, so like here, our HD signal gets compressed, and so if you're looking at a 4K at home, it's not going to look like what you're used to on 4K. We are working with getting that resolved, and eventually that will all work itself out. It's just a matter of time and resources.
I want to thank you for your role in that. I know over the years you've been instrumental and part of an interest in that. So
Right.
thank you for that.
Actually, it's it's an important part for the city and the public and the school districts, as you know. And when Scott and I started here many years ago now, TC Media was in a little tiny building, and we used to have a talk show called Conversations with the Council, something. Oh, Lacey Live. You're right. Actually, that's what it was called. Yeah. That's right. So I'm getting old. Scott's not, apparently. And the studio was so small, they had one little room that was the studio where the guests would sit. We had 4 people on the panel, kind of like this type of arrangement. We actually had to back the camera tripod out the door of the studio into the lobby to get it back far enough to get a wide shot to get the 4 guests. So that shows you, and now, of course, if you've been up there, the studio is beautiful and very large. So it really has come a long ways.
It's a critical part of our being open and transparent with the public, so I mean, this is a no-brainer.
Absolutely.
Also, just like to speak to what a community asset TC Media is. They not only provide an opportunity for people to connect to their government, but also to local nonprofits, as well as providing an educational and skill building opportunity for people in the public, because they actually teach people how to use equipment and how to produce. So a wonderful asset to Thurston County.
Absolutely. In fact, I think Jen can talk to, we now use them for teaching youth how to use cameras and equipment through part of our Parks and Recreation program offering.
Great. So it's been moved and seconded to authorize the city manager to enter to the 2020-2022 operating agreement with Thurston Community Media. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries.
So we're going to keep Steve just for a moment. So we have another item before you, which is a proposal for the Lacey Child Care Center Services contract to be extended with ESD 113, and Steve will provide the background on that item.
Thank you, Mayor and Scott, and I mentioned this with the committee, so I'll mention it here tonight. Scott's first month here, we actually dedicated the Child Care and Family Services Center. It's in the Corporate Center Park, kind of across the street from Lowe's there. In 1999, October or September, and we entered into a 10-year contract with them. In 2009, this is Educational School District / Sound Harbor Head Start. We issued that 10-year contract in 2009, so it is now just expiring in 2019. And staff and the executive team are recommending that council consider approving another 10-year, which will take us through the next decade. I don't have to tell you about Head Start and ECAP. You guys, I'm sure, know about that, as well as ESD 113. It's been very, very successful. We provide year 1 through year 5, early education, nutrition, childcare, and the idea 20 years ago was to let lower income families where one or both parents need to get out and work. And as you know, even back then, 20 years ago, if you had your kid in a pretty good childcare center, basically your whole paycheck was going to pay for that. So the idea was, let's give them free childcare so when they go out and work at a lower wage job, they're able to move their family into financial security. And unfortunately, I didn't write down how many folks when she presented at the General Government Committee last month, but it's been thousands of families that have benefited. Mm-hmm. So it's very successful.
And just a note for the public and council, but that was a partnership really with the council at that point was concerned about, again, having affordable child care for low-income families. We got a CDBG grant that Steve actually helped draft, and so we built the building, and then we partnered in with providers to make sure we can provide that service. So a good example of getting a government partnership for a community problem solved.
Move to authorize the city manager to enter into a 10-year services contract with Educational Service District 113, Sound to Harbor Early Learning for operation of the Lacey Child Care Center.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Is there any discussion? Council member?
Go
Go.
What I found interesting about this is that if a generation is 20 years, then this facility has raised a generation of young adults right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Councilmember?
I did have a question about, there was discussion about we're potentially losing an age bracket within this. Could we talk about that a little bit?
So I believe the state increased the providers to provide that instruction for early care providers, and so the infant to really about 2 to 3 is no longer being available, but they are still providing it for that 2 to 3 to almost 5 years old. I think there's been discussions among council, maybe there's a potential partnership with North Thurston Public Schools to talk about early learning. I think we understand that's a huge concern, and the earlier that we can provide that type of service to the community, it will have long-term benefits. So it's an ongoing discussion.
I know that during our joint meeting with North Thurston Public Schools, we asked Scott to, meet with Deb Clemens and see if we can start, a conversation and maybe in conjunction with our Chamber of Commerce to help expand those services. So we'll wait till that happens. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, it's been moved and second to authorize city manager to enter into this 10-year services contract. All in favor of that motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
So our second to last item is our Regional Environmental Education Partnership with interlocal agreement. Emily Watts from Water Resources will provide that information.
Hi there. So I work in the Water Resources Department, and I'm here seeking approval for the city manager to enter into the Regional Environmental Education Partnership. It has a very long name. We just call it REAP, the interlocal agreement. We have an expiring REAP ILA with the partnering jurisdictions of Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater, and Thurston County. The proposed 6-year ILA would include those same partners. The ILA allows us to regionally collaborate, develop, implement, and fund stormwater education and outreach. The ILA splits the cost among the partnering jurisdictions based on residential population. Lacey's portion is 25%, which amounts to $22,500 per year for the 6 years, totaling $135,000. The benefits include not only helping us make our meet our NPDES permit requirements, but we do so in a way that provides Lacey residents with an abundance of hands-on activities, workshops, lectures. Someone mentioned tree planting events. A lot of those are facilitated through Stream Team, which is a REAP program, and we would not be able to offer these ourselves if we were not part of the interlocal agreement, and we're able to take advantage of 6 full-time staff across all of the jurisdictions that help do REAP activities. There's an annual work plan each year, which guides our educational focus. So if there's something that comes up that we need to change or focus on based on water quality needs, we can do so in the next work plan. And then an end-of-year evaluation so we can keep programs and tasks improving. So we're here to answer any questions you might have about the REAP ILA.
I move that we approve the City of Lacey to participate in the REEP ILA.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion.
There's a lot of great programs in this. I particularly want to point out the Bobs.
The bags on board.
So.
Yep, pit waste bag dispensers are one of the items that we offer at all of the city halls, but it also is something we offer to JAS, Joint Animal Services, as well as an insert that REAP provides in all of the annual license renewals for pets.
I'm just totally supportive of this.
Thank you.
It's a good educational program.
And I'd just like to recognize how much work goes into this in our collaboration and our requirements with the Department of Ecology. So thank you so much for all the work you and your team put into this. It's very impressive.
Absolutely, thank you.
And the regional effort from the different
It is.
municipalities.
It's nice that we can have
partnerships.
cohesive education and messaging, so people from each jurisdiction aren't being bombarded with the same message in a different format. It just helps keep things a little more clear.
So it's been moved and seconded to approve the City of Lacey's participation in REAP ILA. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you.
One final item, our Parks Director is going to provide an update. The Parks Board has recommended rule updates to our parks rules, and I'll hand it over to Jen.
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. Before you, like the City Manager said, is a recommendation for final approval of amended park rules. Last year, as you know, the Park Board worked on some updates. Again, this year, they worked on a few others, and we're hoping to be able to go forth with signage finally after all these updates and housekeeping items. So, just to give you a rundown. Oh, by the way, the rule changes have been filed with the city clerk and certified per the LMC for the process. So we just need, the board needs final approval from city council. I'll do a quick rundown. If you want to go to the amended copy, the one that shows the track changes, under section A, which mentions misdemeanors. So the change in this paragraph and also in paragraph B is that it used to be if there's a misdemeanor, the person would be trespassed from just that one park property or facility, but we had a request from the police department to just make it so that the person would be trespassed from all park properties for up to a year. And then if you want to move down to numbers 1, 2, and 3 in section B, those are all added items. The first one says uses park facilities outside of standard park hours, which are 7 a.m. to dark unless otherwise posted. We added this because it wasn't in there before, but it's posted at all the parks, and so it made sense that it's in the park rules. Number 2, leaves a vehicle in the parking lot outside of standard park hours unless permitted to do so. Vehicles left will get locked in to be retrieved during normal operating hours. So again, this is something that's already being done. It just needs to be recognized in the park rules. Unfortunately, life happens from time to time and somebody's car will break down. But we do need to keep the park hours and close the parks when it's time. And so the park service provider that locks the parks has a notice so that if there is a car left, he can put a little slip on their window that says you can retrieve your vehicle during normal business hours the next day. Number 3 was a police department request, occupies more than one parking space with a vehicle unless permitted to do so. And so that just will prevent people from parking sideways across many stalls. If you go to the next page, numbers 17 and 18, I just put those together because they are regarding animals, so it made more sense to have those adjacent. There was a duplicate rule that was pretty much the same content as number 17, so that was removed. kind of cleaning things up. Number 24, the addition of pickleball courts. When the rules were made, there weren't pickleball courts, and so it prohibits the use of skateboards on those courts. Section D, there's the addition of the very last sentence, which says vehicles in violation of section B2 and B3 are subject to being towed at the owner's expense. So this would be if the vehicle was left for an extended time. It's very rare that this would happen, but it just, again, lets people know what the intent is if that car is left. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Can I get a motion? Anyone?
I'll do a
Trying to
motion.
find their
If I can
computers.
find it.
I'll move.
I move, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay.
It would take me too long to get to.
So I move that we approve the amended park rules per the recommendation of the Lacey Parks Board.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I just want to thank both of them for getting us through that.
Deputy Mayor?
I have a thing that hasn't been changed, but I have a question about it.
Sure.
Number 22 says, and don't laugh, please, uses profane, threatening, or abusive language. And the word profane seems kind of weird. What if it's like using an expletive if they drop a rock on their foot or something? That's an odd thing in there. I'm sorry to.
Yeah,
I know
profanity.
it's
So it is an issue when you have a busy park and there's a lot of people doing a lot of different things. You might have different age groups right next to each other, like a young age group with teenagers or maybe 20-somethings. That's typically where we've seen issues. Is just profanity.
I could understand if it was a large, constant kind of a thing. I just,
That's something that it is.
I have personally
It
experienced
just seemed like a
this.
weird thing.
I have small children. I have a almost 4-year-old, and so we're at the park quite often. And when there are older kids around or people who simply choose to use different types of vocabulary, it's not a healthy place for a child to play to hear those things, because then mommy has to answer what those words mean, and that is the problem.
That's true.
And we have had, some people complained, especially during recreation baseball season, and
Well, that's true.
and
That's
so and they're there with their kids, and we've had a few complaints come through. So
Okay, that was just
everything else looks good.
Yeah.
I guess I'm gonna have to stop appearing nude at the parks too. I never saw that one before. Anyway,
Probably
it's
shouldn't
getting
even
late.
ask about it.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the amended park rules per the recommendation of the Lacey Parks Board. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Standing general committees. First up is the Community Relations and Public Affairs Committee.
Community Relations, Public Affairs met on the 7th October. Myself, Councilmember Cox and Zeman were present. I think it was a 4-item agenda, Lacey's Spring Fun Fair. It was information only. I went through the history of Lacey Spring Fun Fair's annual event. After 1999, the Fun Fair and Lacey Community Events nonprofit group was formed to carry the tradition stated by the Chamber through the support of the City of Lacey. This community event relies on donations, sponsors, and volunteer time from businesses, organizations, North Thurston Public Schools, and residents. The fair attracts probably approximately 16,000 people over the course of a 2-day event. And the Fun Fair Committee is made up of the president of the Lacey Community Events, City of Lacey staff, North Thurston Public Schools staff, volunteers, each leading some aspect of the fair. 2016, Lacey Parks and Recs became more involved and increased responsibilities after paid event coordinator stepped down. Many city departments provide support and contributions to Fun Fair, including Parks and Recs, Lacey Police, Explorers, Senior Patrol, Reserves, Parks Maintenance, Public Works, Water Resources, Animal Services, City Manager's Office, and Public Affairs. As of 2019, St. Martin's University increased the liability insurance level of this Fun Fair, which added an additional $3,000 in insurance cost of the 2-day event. Insurance increase accounts for a substantial amount for the entire year budget So Lacey Community Events sought a better way to produce a popular event. As the city already has adequate coverage, it was determined that the best course of action was for the city to take over responsibility of producing the event while still utilizing volunteer committees in their current roles. Current Spring Fun Fair budget, as it would apply to the city, was provided for review. Lacey Community Events president had indicated if there is a dissolution, that, okay, I'm struggling with that, but I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. Of their organization, any current funds estimated $12,000 would be used to purchase items for use by the fun fair. Although additional duties will be added to the park and recreation special event staff, city staff is able to accommodate this increase to maintain the success of the fun fair community event. Jen provided the public would not notice a change to the structure of event management will change. Ruth Weigel, president of the community events, provided that background of sponsorship support is consistent over year to year. Then land clearing permit process review by Rick Walk. It was information only as well. There's a land clearing permit 18-346, proposed thinning of an area space tract within the plat of Hawks Prairie Unit 17 at Eagles Bluff, issued in August of 2019, and it sparked a lot of neighborhood questions, comments, and concerns. With the permit issued and appealed deadlines passed, staff brought to the committee for review of the permitting process. There was a discussion and an application submitted. The focus of the tree report and review, a summary of public comments received, a summary of the city's regulations, and the conditions placed on the permit to meet city regulations, applicable comments received. Discussions included a full administrative review process along with specific pertinent items, Lacey Municipal Code 14.32. Staff further provided supporting details of the site plan, explanation of the forester report, permit conditions, projects, subsequence, or to complete the discussion. Consensus being that the practices used to administer the appropriate and the health of the stand is the most important issue. We then moved on to the third item was the Lacey appeal process, also by Rick.
I'm sorry to jump in here. I know we're getting late on time here. This report is in here for everyone. Does anyone have any questions with the report?
I was really struggling with this because there's no way to really kind of, simplify it or dumb it down or make it really short. So it just made sense to read it until someone.
Well, we have a late night, and so
yeah.
Is there any questions from it? Seeing none, I'm sorry to cut you off there, buddy, but
I'm all for it.
Okay. Next up is the Utilities Committee. That would be you. I'm sorry. I'm moving forward here.
Thank you for your report.
It was a long meeting.
Yeah.
Can we move to somebody else and come back to me?
Sure. Let's go to Land Use Committee.
Well, we had a one-topic meeting. We had Keely Marino, who is the homeless coordinator for Thurston County, come and give us a presentation on Thurston County's homeless prevention and Thurston County Homeless Crisis Response Plan. The plan is available on Thurston County's website. This plan addresses the use of money, largely federal funds, through housing and urban development grants, a funding source called Consolidated Homeless Grants, and local document recording fees. There are two sources of those. The plan outlines the 5 objectives that the State Department of Commerce requires and highlights the ideal system to focus on prevention and permanent housing. This plan went before county commissioners on October 29th. So, but I think it was a big overhaul of the plan that was sort of belatedly adopted last year. Mm-hmm. And I think Keely did a pretty awesome job being so new into her position. So it'll be good guidance for us moving forward. That's my report.
And I'll go back to Councilmember Zeman.
Thank you. So Utilities Committee met on Monday, and we had an excellent meeting, and I'm really pleased to report that we are moving forward with a new utility billings website. It's being upgraded, and it was a presentation, so I'm really pleased with that. So new security checks, much more user-friendly. There's opportunities for people to make it easier to pay their utility bills, especially for people who have multiple locations where they pay utilities. So really wonderful, a great step and investment in that regard, and making it easier for residents of Lacey. And we also had a fire hydrant operation and maintenance presentation. It's important to make sure those things are maintained on a regular basis. They are on track and doing a wonderful job. And that is my report.
Thank you. Finance Committee, Deputy Mayor.
Finance, you.
Oh, that's me.
Yes.
Well, mine's quick because everything that we've discussed on the Finance Committee, our reserve designation ordinance, the authorizing the ad valorem tax resolution, all this stuff we've already went through. And so unless there's any questions, that will be my report. Deputy Mayor.
So I'm in the same boat. We met October 15th, but we just passed the Lacey Child Care Center ILA of the Thurston Community Media contract renewal, the Hicks Lake rate reduction, and then, of course, the land clearing permit information, as well as an administrative appeal process. So that's it.
Great. So first, I would like to recognize we have a Peerless Planning Commission member in the back. Dave Wasson, thank you for being here. Before we go on to boards, commissions, and committee reports, does anyone have a hot report that they want to get out today, or can we push this off to our next meeting?
I'd be thrilled if we did that.
Great.
Despite
We're going
all
to push
those
it off
hours
to
I
our
spent
next meeting.
preparing.
It's gotten late, and so we will report out on boards, commissions, committee reports at our next meeting. We are going to be adjourning to a work session to talk about the suspension of on Main Street as a designated permitted parking area. And so we've reached the end of our agenda. Until next time, you keep it classy, Lacey, and I'll call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.